Greetings and welcome to this week's broadcast here at Kingdom's Teachings. If you saw our broadcast from last week, you were probably as blessed as I was with a message entitled The Hope of a Caring Heart. And during that broadcast, we had a very special guest, Ms. Whitney Riefler, who shared her life journey and her family's life journey of faith by having hope in her relationship in Jesus Christ as they walked through the journey of her entire family ministering through the caring for a very special gift that God gave her through her daughter. During that broadcast, Whitney shared not only about the power and the witness of God's faith and his strength, she also shared about some of the natural supports that God blessed and surrounded her family with as part of her journey. So on today's broadcast, I have the privilege of welcoming a very special guest who was part of that natural support system that Whitney and her family was blessed with. So as we talk today for part 2 of the message, The Hope of a Caring Heart, I want you to join me in welcoming a very special guest, Mrs. Mary Taro.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm really good and glad to be here.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure meeting you. Did not know you. I had heard of you before until God allowed Whitney's and my paths to cross as she was sharing her testimony. So she gave credit to God, but she gave so much credit to you and your obedience to God for the ministry that that God birthed through you. So before we get into what God has given you to share, I did want to share with you a little bit about Mary and her background. She is a wife, she's a mom of 2 adult children. She's an author of The Heart of a Caregiver, speaker, teacher, caregiver. And her ministry specialty, or one of her ministry specialties, is family caregivers that are in crisis. But one of the things that really just kind of stuck out in my introduction to you online was something that you quoted, and I just want to quote the first few lines off your website. And Mary says, "We may be very different people, but you and I have a lot in common. Loving and caring for someone who has a chronic needs can be exhausting, confusing, even devastating, and only other people who have been through it really understand it."
Absolutely, and I understand that we both have been caregivers. You've been one too, and it's I care for my daughter. My husband and I care for our daughter, who's 23 years old, who's mentally and physically challenged and has had a disability since birth. And then we cared for his mom. He's an only child, and we cared for his mom through the last year and a half of her life, and saw her through early stages of dementia and cancer. But it really isn't until you've been in the shoes of someone who has had to take care of someone with a chronic illness or a disability or a mental illness or a cognitive decline or age-related issues that you really begin to understand the demands on someone's life, but also the emotional and spiritual burden that it can really be. I find a lot of people struggling tremendously emotionally, and amazingly, they struggle with their faith. They really shake a fist at God and say, "You can't be who you say you are to allow what we're having to go through."
Okay. So one of the, as I was praying about your being here and sharing your message, I really was just praying and asking God to allow you to speak to those who may be watching the Kingdom's Teachings broadcast, because and I'll share my experience when I was a caregiver for my sister on a long-term basis. There are things that you think, but you don't audibly feel comfortable saying them to someone because the person could misinterpret it. You don't love the person, that you're giving up on the person, or you're blaming the person. And so I really want our time together for you to help people who are caregivers to just deal with some of that, and to realize that God would not have given you something for you to feel like you've been condemned by God or you're being punished by God.
Gosh, that's the whole thrust of our Bible study that we do, is to help you change your perspective from one of someone who has become the victim of the disease or disability, because not only is the person that is apparently sick, trapped and feeling these ways, but the person who cares for them is feeling it. And what is coming at you from the rest of the world is, you must be very special, because God only gives people like this to very special people, and you want to kick them in the knees and say, this is killing me.
Yeah.
It's messing up my marriage, it's messing up my finances, it's messing up my faith, I'm having a hard time. And what we work on is to help people really come to grips with, what is it? It isn't all just the person that you're caring for that's welling up inside of you. It's other emotions about other things, and you might be having a bad day, or you might not like your job, or your husband might be driving you crazy, or you might have another sick child. That you need to be able to understand all the things that are playing on your emotions, compartmentalize them, to assess yourself. And then to be able to change your perspective and say, God is for me, not against me.
Right.
I am not alone, even though I feel very alone. And I have been equipped to do what God is asking me to do. And this whole concept of God didn't do this to me, God is doing this through me to make us all better.
So share with us your journey to the birthing of the ministry of the Heart of a Caregiver.
Well, as I said, we have a daughter who's mentally and physically challenged. She has a seizure disorder, and when she was 2, she had half of her brain removed. And that was a very, very long journey. I mean, years of hospital visits and things like that. And I was not a person of faith when she was born. Okay. But one night, when we had been, very early on, when we had been sent home for her to die in our arms at home, I was nursing her in the middle of a night, and for the first time in my life I cried out to God, and I said, how did Mary, the mother of Jesus, watch her son suffer and die like I'm watching my baby suffer and die? And I heard God speak to my heart, let her suffering be for my glory. And that was just outrageous. I'd never heard anything like that. And I thought, who is this God? And I got crazy. I couldn't put down the Bible, because in it I was reading things like, the first will be last and the last will be first, and that the weak are the most precious to him, and those who are afflicted and suffering are the ones he can use the most. And this word just came alive to me, and I couldn't get enough of it. And so through all the nights sleeping on the floors in the hospital, and all the nights worrying if this was the night the Lord was going to take her, and all those things, I began to learn to let this all be for his glory, and let our family draw near to God and discover the miracles that were waiting there. And this course, this curriculum, actually came out of my own pain, so desperate to have someone else to talk to about what I was discovering in the Word. And I couldn't find any other kind of group. I found support groups and things that were people dumping more toxin. I didn't want anybody else's toxin. I wanted hope.
You had enough of your own.
I had enough, and I wanted hope. And it was really out of my own desperation that I needed a curriculum to call other people around so we could all talk together about this hope that I was finding in God's Word.
One of the things I noticed on your tagline on your website, it says, from overwhelmed to overjoyed. Share with us what that means.
Well, there's 3 of them I love. It's from exhausted to exhilarated, from isolated to inspired, and from overwhelmed to overjoyed. And it means that it's possible to continue to have to do all the crazy stuff you have to do when you're a caregiver, the doctor's visits, the scheduling, the meds, the IEP meetings if it's for a kid, the research, all the myriad of things that are new that you do in addition to your regular life when you're a caregiver, and that it can be extremely overwhelming, but that you can do it with great joy, that you can discover that you are doing it as a servant of the Lord. That's really probably the biggest perception shift that people who participate in the study go through, and that is the very calling is for us to become more like Christ. Mm-hmm. And Christ wasn't someone who wielded a big sword and had power and did all this stuff. He was a servant. He washed people's feet. He was humble. And to learn that you have been called to the very calling of Christ. You're allowed to, as a caregiver, you touch people's wounds, and you enter into their most intimate spaces, and you interpret the cries of their heart, and you give them big dangerous medicines and help make life-threatening decisions. And if you thought you were doing that under your own power, ooh. But knowing that you have the opportunity to be filled by the power of the Holy Spirit, to love in a supernatural way, and not only that can affect the person, not only affect your own well-being, your own sanity in it, but can actually change the person that you're caring for, that they can see God's love lived out through you. And then the love that is expressed between the two of you can be a sign of hope to a hurting world.
So part of this, you talk about there are 5 steps to transformation. So can you kind of walk us through, what's step number 1?
Well, step number 1 is you have to assess
Okay.
what really is going on here. You know, is it just my child with disabilities that's on my last nerve, that I just don't think I can take it anymore? Or are there other things going on in my life? And what, I mean, it's everything from just sitting down and saying, my house is a mess, our finances are in a shambles, my faith is feeling very shaky. I mean, really just getting honest with yourself, because you can't deal with anything until it's out on the table. And to not be afraid to put it out on the table, because even Jesus said, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? I mean, even he cried out. And so that first step of assessing is really important, to get that on the table.
Okay. So what have you found in working with your small groups ministries? What are some of the challenges that, for people who you're working with in crisis, for them just to face the reality?
Well, they don't even want to say that it's hard, because they feel so guilty, saying, this is my mother, I shouldn't feel this way about her. Okay. Or this is my child, or this is my wife with cancer, I shouldn't feel this way. And so they're, you know, to get them to feel, and I think that's the beauty of a small group, is when you get around other people who are expressing the very things you've been terrified to express.
I remember when I was a caregiver for my father for the last 2 years of his life, and it was with Alzheimer's and diabetes complications. And there were a lot of different emotions, but it was the love that I had for him that really just, even on my most day when I was tired and I think I couldn't even take another breath, right. Somehow God allowed me to find the strength and to take that next breath. But I also remember in the midst of, you know, having to make a lot of different decisions, you know, is this really the right medication? Because you become, like you said, that voice for the person in a lot of times, and you're making decisions that could impact their lives. And you can only do that through prayer, through relationship with God leading you. And I think in caring for him, that role reversal of me going from being the child and he's the father, and that role was still there in the natural, but I kind of had to become the parent in a sense. Yes. It made me feel very uncomfortable at times. Sometimes I think I was supposed to be asking his permission about everything, whereas other times there are decisions that I just had to make. So can you talk a little bit about when there is a reversal of roles and how people can deal with that? That's
actually the second step.
Oh, okay.
Is that you have to acknowledge, and that's different from assessing, because acknowledging is saying, it goes from being, you know, these are the facts of what's driving me crazy or what are difficult for me, to saying, this is how I feel about it and I'm willing to acknowledge it. And one of the things is the shift in the relationship, that it goes from being parent and child to now you really are parenting them, or you're caring for them. Like with women who have a husband who becomes sick, it's someone that you had thought would be there to take care of you for the rest of your life, and suddenly those roles have changed. Or this is a baby inside of me that I'm going to love and care for forever, and it's so easy to love this child, to grieving the loss of the child that you had been dreaming you were about to have, and letting go of those former relationships and acknowledging this is something new and it's different, and therefore it's going to, you have to let go of what you thought things were going to be. Otherwise you're constantly fighting a false reality, and that's part of the frustration.
And I went through that with, I was going in the, okay, I don't know whether my father has, you know, Alzheimer's or dementia, and what brought it home for me one day, we were sitting in my living room, and he was also legally blind, but he got up from the bed that he was sitting on, and he went and sat on the coffee table or the end table in the family room. And so he's sitting there, and all of a sudden he's talking to his brothers who's not there, who had already gone home to be with the Lord. And so he's on this journey in his mind that he was traveling to New York. So he invites me to get in the car with him to go to New York. And I am so overwhelmed just by the whole situation. And I'm trying to bring him back to reality. And finally, I look back now and I realize that was only God that said, sit on the coffee table and take the journey with him.
That's great.
And what was so humorous about the whole thing was once I calmed down and I just sat on the table next to him. So he tells me, can you wind up the car window? And I do the motion of winding up the window. And he says, not that window, the other window. And I went from crying to just all out laughter. But God used something just that simple where I was trying to fight against the reality of where he was and how the dementia had progressed or the Alzheimer's had progressed to, no, we will not sit on the table. We're not going to New York. This is not a car. And when I just gave into what God was leading me to do, and we drove for about an hour until he finally, realigned his thoughts and decided he was ready to lie back down in bed.
Well, and you're leading me right to the third one, because this is a big part of making that shift, is just to allow and align your thoughts and your emotions and all with God's truth.
Okay.
Instead of trying to keep these people and keep your life on a gerbil wheel and but we have this schedule and this isn't reality and you need to be able to do this, and the stress like we had with our daughter with special needs, just a constant barrage of people saying, oh, she needs to be able to eat by then and she needs to be able to walk by then and this pressure, and God's going, she's mine.
Yeah.
This is my situation. Start aligning yourself with God's expectation, with God's truth, with God's calendar, and receive God's peace, instead of aligning yourself with a world full of people who are telling you what you need to do, and you're just a human being. I'll never forget when they told me my daughter needed brain surgery and they were going to remove half of her brain. How can a little 20-something-year-old mom make a decision like that for another human being? And so the peace begins as you begin to align your thoughts with the Lord's thoughts and allow that to become your new rhythm of life, and that things aren't ridiculous and things aren't out of control, but they are in His hands and He has an answer.
So talk about it from the perspective of where God met you, because sometimes I can assume that everybody that's watching Kingdom's Teachings is in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and I'm learning that because I wasn't always in a personal relationship with Jesus Christ when I watched, ministries. Talk a little bit about where God met you at that point and the encounter that you had for the person who may be viewing today's program and they don't have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Right, because I didn't.
Okay.
I was very much in control of my own life, and I had a hard agenda, and I was a career woman, and my husband and I both had big jobs, and we had hired a nanny. This baby wasn't going to get in the way of our climb to the top and all that kind of stuff, and boy did the Lord have other plans. But really, there was not a person who, introduced me to the gospel or anything like that. It really just was out of desperation I opened a Bible because, well, I had heard from the Lord that night when my daughter was seizing in my arms. And when I heard that voice speak to my heart, I was like, this is real. I got to know more. And so the transformation for everyone is very different. Yes. But my advice is, when you hear him knocking, open the door.
You might want to answer.
Yes, you might, because it changes everything. And I think that's something else. People are afraid of the change. I think so often people have their life, we're all so controlling, to try and keep ourselves from feeling like we're going to fly off the planet. But it's when you give up that control and allow the one who really can keep you from flying off the planet and let him be in control of it all, oh my gosh, that's when things become joyful again. That's when the love becomes so real and not just this struggle. So everyone's experience is very different, but all I can say is open that door when he knocks.
So what's our next step in the 5-step process?
We're on number 4, and that is affirming.
Okay.
Because it's one thing to read the Bible and to hear God loves me, I'm never alone, I'm always in His presence, He loves the person I care for more than I do, all those kind of things. But you have to tell yourself that every day.
Okay.
Because the world will continue to hit you in the face. The truth of stinky diapers and IEP deadlines and therapy that you can't pay for, and you know, the disease gets worse. There's a new spot on the film. Those are the facts of life, but you have to continue to affirm these truths, that they really begin to take hold in your life, and you are acknowledging before God, I believe what you're saying, not what the doctor's saying.
Okay.
I believe what you're saying, not what our finances are saying. And that's a really powerful step too.
One of the things that I have learned over life experiences is that whole thing about facing reality but choosing faith. And like you said, choosing to believe the truth of what God says about it. Not even what I'm feeling, because you know, some people say, you know, your feelings are just temporary, just kind of go with the flow, go with your gut. But like you're saying, we really need to go with what we're hearing and what we're experiencing in our encounters with God. But facing that reality sometimes can be so hard, even when you love God with all your heart and you're believing in God and you are confessing your faith and your Christianity. For me, it's like I also was a caregiver for my sister who had a long-term illness and went on to be home with the Lord 9 years ago. And it wasn't all this, you know, everything is bad and everything is stress. We had a beautiful life together, but we both had to face the reality of the long-term nature of her illness. And even the day that God called her home, it was unexpected to me. I later found it wasn't unexpected to her. But one of the things that gave me the greatest peace was that we lived life together. We didn't sit around, and she never kind of walked around feeling sorry for herself or, you know, feeling like I'm a victim here. She lived her life with such passion and such faith and such trust in God that I had no other reason but to trust God, because I'm like, if she's the person in the pain and she's the one that's doing the suffering and the difficulty, and if she can experience and be such a great witness of the joy of the Lord, then what do I have to complain about?
But you're so lucky, because so often you're dealing with a child and you wonder if they know the Lord, or you're dealing with someone who, well, so many of the people that come through our classes are people who are struggling with parents or spouses who, as they come closer to death, they get more bitter and angry and afraid. And so the power of being someone who can forgive and who can comfort, who can teach completely selfless love, and helping that person come to a place of peace about what's happening in their life is another huge part about becoming a caregiver. So often when you're confronted with someone who's afraid, they're not saying I'm afraid, but they're acting in ways that what it really is a call for love. And if you're not drawing from the constant source of God, if you're drawing from self, you're going to run out of enough patience and enough love to love someone in this who's crying out this constantly, I need to know love before I die, which is very often the case. You're so blessed to have had a sister who already knew the Lord.
Yeah, I look back at that, and I'm just very grateful that we both came to know the Lord when we were kids. And it's not that it was a perfect life or an easy journey, because we had our journeys in terms of being matured and perfected in Christ. But to be able to deal with or to face the illness and to be in that role as a caregiver in a relationship with Christ, I do not know how people would do this without it. Can you talk, so another thing that people say sometimes is that, I'm not claiming that. So, you know, the diagnosis has been given, the medical report is there, not that there aren't sometimes medical errors or whatever, and God is not limited to any of that. But it's back to one of the things that you talked about facing reality. Because I see a lot of people who will say, I'm just not claiming that. And in not claiming that, it's like there's a denial of the reality that's right there. And it's, to me, it's almost like a denial of the faith that is going to be required for you to believe God in whatever that situation is.
Woo,
So bring us back to reality.
I could preach on that for a long time, but because yes, you have been tapped to be someone just like the people you read about in the Bible who weren't ready, who didn't think they had what it would take, who didn't think they were well enough equipped, who thought the timing was all wrong. You know, like Gideon and Moses and David and all these people were, when the Lord tapped them, they're kind of like going, me? Me? But when you give in and allow and don't say, nope, I'm not claiming that, this disease isn't happening, this is going to go away, and you deny the reality, you're denying the opportunity to be used mightily by God, truly supernaturally, and to know what it's like to walk on water or to sleep in a lion's den. That's called surrendered obedience. And the journey of pain with our daughter, people say, how can you still believe when after 23 years of still seizing? And I go, because after 23 years of still seizing, she's transformed a marriage, a community, started a ministry. The pain is where God is and will meet you in most mighty ways.
So in our few minutes remaining, talk to us about the last step, which you've kind of been talking about it, but just...
Yeah, I guess it's just to act.
Okay.
It's to act on it. And it's to say, today I'm going to love in a different way. Today I'm going to choose patience. Today I'm going to walk into this. Today, the things that you've been running from, act in faith. The truth that you've been reading is real and God is present, and things will be different and can be.
Great. Well, Mary, thank you so much for being on today's program. I'm telling you, just your sharing the 5 steps to transformation has really ministered to me. So my prayer is that Mary's, the ministry that God is giving her, the heart of a caregiver, has ministered to you. And I just want to encourage you that when you find yourselves in difficult situations, don't feel like you have to do it all alone. You have people like Mary, who has been anointed and appointed and chosen by God to minister to you in the point of your needs and to share information that God has given her. So I hope that you have, in watching the last 2 broadcasts, have just been able to find your God wink, as was shared on last week, and just find your source of strength in this. So I want to just thank you for watching today's broadcast. I want to thank you so much, Mary, for being with us. So join us here next week here at Kingdom's Teachings as we continue our series on being called to be a witness of hope in Jesus Christ.